Welcome to 16 weeks of SATs, week 3 with myself, Andrew. So, week 1 and week 2 have been massive successes. I've been over the moon with the amount of commentary that people have got involved with, but also just the fact that I can genuinely see that children are improving, or you guys are improving. Week 1 with addition and subtraction and making sure that our place value is bang on so that we've got our ones, tens, hundreds, thousands, and so on. That's made a real difference, and we should be mopping up easy marks with that understanding of place value. Week 2, we've then moved a little bit more difficult into developing that real understanding of how we can apply decimals. Okay, so decimal addition and subtraction, and the key part of this of week 2 was subtracting from subtracting from whole numbers. So if you haven't seen that video from week 2, definitely check that out. It's about halfway when we start focus on subtracting from whole numbers. Very important and lots of marks to be picked up. Now, in week 3, we're going to be moving on this week to dividing and multiplying by tens, hundreds, and thousands. Now, the beauty of this week, again, I think this is when we start to think about how we're accumulating marks, addition and subtraction, subtraction from decimals, there's lots of marks from there already. Now we're starting to move into multiplying and dividing by 10, 100, and 1,000. And this area of arithmetic is 100% an area where children who aren't as confident lose marks because we think we have to do either a short division or short multiplication in terms of a written strategy to actually calculate this, when that really isn't going to help us that much, or it's going to take up a lot more time than is actually necessary. So it's a really important week. Having scanned through some of the previous SATs papers, there's always one of two of these, sometimes even 3 or 4 in the middle of the paper. So they're very important and they're very, very easy marks to pick up. And once we start doing that, picking up these easy marks, that's when all of a sudden our scores transform from a low 20s to a low to mid 30s because we're picking up these easy marks. So let's get straight stuck into dividing and multiplying by tens, hundreds, and thousands. And I guarantee by the end of this lesson, having done some of the practice, you'll have mastered this and you'll be picking those marks up. So let's get stuck into it. Right then. So this week, lots and lots of things to consider within multiplying and dividing by tens, hundreds, and thousands. So let's get stuck into the main parts of the problem. So when we look at, first of all, let's just look at multiplication. So we've got a question here that's multiplying by 10. Now let's look at the common thing that people will normally do. So pupils will see times 10. Let's just highlight that up. They'll see the multiplication and automatically go to thinking, I need to do a grid method or short multiplication. So we would start to see something like, I'll just get rid of that. So here we go. So we'd see something like 5.3 because they think this is the right thing to do. And then all of a sudden, we're in a little bit of a mess because we're not really sure what to do with this decimal. We're then multiplying by 10. So essentially, if we were doing this in a proper grid method, we would need a placeholder and his 0 down here for when we multiply by the 10, even though that's a 0. Sorry, even though we've got 1. So there's lots of complicating factors here, and inevitably what's going to happen is we're probably going to get the question wrong. And the reality is we don't actually need to do that. When we're spotting these, let's have a quick look. When we're spotting times 10, times 100, and times 1,000, and likewise with divide, if we're spotting them, divide by 10, divide by 100, divide by 1,000, there's a different approach that we need to take, and it isn't doing a really formal grid method. And we can do this quite simply with just a little bit of understanding about place value and a little bit of an understanding about what times 10, times 100, and times 1,000 actually means. And you won't be surprised to hear that we're going to go back to place value. So the first thing I would suggest that you do is that we just write this number down out of the question. So we're just going to write it here in its place value. So we've got 5.3. So we're just going to write 5.3. Very, very simple. I'm just going to rub that 5 out because I don't really like how I've presented it. So 5.3. Now the key thing here is to understand now the place value. So I know that this is a 1. I know this would be now 10. This would be 100, and this is a tenth. So by just writing the number down, we know that this column is the ones column. We know that this column is the tens column, and this column, and this is where squared paper, we talked about squared paper before. Squared paper is so important because the squared paper, the columns of the squared paper, is going to allow us to create place value. Now, the next thing to know is the fact that we are multiplying by 10. All right. So just give this a little shade. So we're multiplying by 10. Now, the beauty of place value is that place value increases by the power of 10. Okay. So we've got 1s to 10s. That is essentially times 10. And from 10s to 100, that is also times 10, which 10 times 10 is, if we did the single jump, that would be times 100. So we can quite easily see how timesing by 10 and place value can be linked together to solve these problems really easy. I'm going to show you, and we'll talk through some examples. So because this question is 5.3 times 10, and we know that if we have a 1 here, so this 1 here, the 5 and the 3, they're going to be 10 times bigger, then they're going to move this way to the left. Numbers that are going to be multiplied are always going to move this way along a place value chart. If it was division, the numbers would become smaller and move to the right along a place value chart. So with this in mind, we can use, obviously the decimal is never going to move, so we can pop a decimal in below here, because this is where we're just going to move everything along to create our answer. So all of a sudden the 5, because we're timesing by 10, is going to move 10 times bigger, because that's times 10. So the 5 is now just in here, but we're going to do it in the column below. The 5 is here, and the 3 is going to do exactly the same. So the 3 has to remain alongside it. So times 3 times, or 0.3 times 10. So that's a times 10. So the 3 goes there. Okay. And because there's nothing else, there's nothing in here to move around, it's just 53. All right. So again, the place value up here is really, because children will just go, well, it's 53 point. Well, no, because there's nothing after the decimal. We can now sort of forget the decimal. And the answer, we've got 5 10s and we've got 3 1s. The answer is just 53. So if we had an answer box over here, like we would in SATs, for example, we would just write in 53 and we would get the mark. So if we just rub all this out and just go back to the original situation, it's really just understanding that 5.3 times 10, if we just write it out again, 5.3 times 10 is just making this number 10 times bigger. And if we know that we've got times 10 and we know that that's moving everything one space to the left, then we can really easily answer this question by just starting to jot things down. The other clever little thing to note, which is a little clue, because we don't want hacks or cheats. We really want to understand why we're doing it. But there is a little clue that lots of teachers will tell you, and it's not a rule, but it's more just a clue about how many columns we're going to move a number. So if we had times 10, then we can move all of the numbers I'll get rid of that, 1 column. And the clue is that there's 1 0 in 10. So that would give us the hint that we're going to make 1 jump. Okay, we're going to move everything 1 column to the left. Now, times 100, there are 2 zeros. So that's given us a big clue and a reminder that when we times by 10, everything is going to move 2 columns to the left. All right, that's because we're timesing by 10, and then we're timesing by 10 again. So it would be 5.3. Let's have 5.3 here. We would have 1, 2. Okay, so the 5 would end up in this column, and then it would be 1, 2, 3, because in the thousands column, we've got 3 zeros, which is giving us a clue to move everything 3 columns to the left, because timesing by 1,000 is just timesing by 10, timesing by 10, timesing by 10, or multiplying by 10. So it's very, very simple, and that works either way for division and multiplication. So that first bit was really long, so let's dive into the next question and just lay it out really simply. So like I said, step 1 was lots of jottings on the last page. In this one, we've got 14.62 times 10. So straight away in my head, the little thing that I'm spotting is the fact that the little clue of the 0 is telling me I'm going to move everything's going to become larger because we're multiplying, and everything's going to move 1 space to the left. So again, the first thing to do is to just write the question down, or the number that we're working with, in the space that we have to work in. So I'll just get a pen up. So we've got 14.62. So don't need to write times 10 or anything like that. Because we've got a decimal in the question, essentially we need a decimal answer, and I'm going to move everything to 1 space to the left. And because we're multiplying everything, if we multiply, numbers get larger. So on place value, if we have ones, tens, hundreds, thousands, everything is getting larger by moving to the left. And we know that this is times 10. Each column move is 10 times bigger. So this is very simple. In my head, I'm going to work with this number first, and then everything will just follow on really, really simply. If I get this one right, everything else just has to come next to it. So the 1 would move into that column. So I'm going to write it in here. So it's this grid that I'm going to write it in. So the 1 goes there. And then we don't even really need to think about anything now. I've got the 1's right. I've times that by 10. So that 10 has become 100. And everything else is just going to move along in order. So the 4 has to be next. The 6 has to be next. And the 2 has to be next. So we're not jumbling anything up. So the answer is 146.2. So what is maybe quite a daunting question, 14.62 times 10, is really easy by just using some jottings, okay? It sounds a bit old school. And again, if we had an answer box in our SATs paper, it would be really important, 146.2, and that would get us the mark. Here's another question. Now again, we could look at this question and think 0.473 times 100. Oh, that's really tricky. And again, we could go into a grid method, but we're not. Let's just go straight into what we know. We know there's a decimal as well. So it's 0. Just gonna, because I know where I'm going with this. I'm just gonna move it a little bit further over. So we've got 0.473. Okay. Again, there's a decimal in the question, so there's a decimal in the answer to begin with in terms of our layout. Because we've put the decimals in here, all right, essentially this is just me writing the number down from the question, and this row is where I'm going to move everything along left and right. But because we're multiplying, everything's going to move left. Again, the clue that we need to spot is multiplying by 100. When we're multiplying by 100, we know that multiplying by 100 is times 10 times 10. There's 2 zeros, so that's just a little reminder that we're going to move 2 columns, 2 zeros, 2 columns to the left. So let's just do it. Again, I'm not going to work with this 0 because essentially in the ones column, there's nothing there. We've got ones, tens, hundreds, and thousands. So I'm going to work with the 4, okay? And I'm going to move the 4 2 columns to the left. So that would be 1, 2, because we're not counting the decimals as a column. So we've got times 10 times 10. So we've times by 100. So the 4 would be now in this column. Okay, it's moved into this column. So that naturally the 7 is going to come next, and then the 3 has to come next. And again, we can double check that by counting. Has the 3 moved 2 spaces or 2 columns? 1, 2. It has. Has the 7 moved 2? 1, 2. Yes, it has. But if we get the first number right, then everything else will just follow in line. So again, if we had an answer box in the SATs, we would be making sure 47.3 is put in the answer. All right, so 0.473 times 100 is just 47.3. Now again, this is the sort of a little subtle variation that we need to consider. In the other questions, we've had decimals, okay? In this one, it's just a whole number, 54. Again, get into the habit of writing the number down in your squared paper. We don't need to put a decimal in. We just need to know that this is the ones column, this is the tens, this is the hundreds, this is the thousands. So we have our place value, and because we're multiplying by 100, notice there's 2 zeros. So we're going to move 2 columns to the left as we get larger. So we're going to move this way 2 columns. And this one should be very, very straightforward. You might be able to see that it's 5,400 straight away, but it wouldn't take long to do this. So again, the 5 is going to move 2 columns. So that's 1, 2. So it's going to end up in this column here, the thousands column. So we've got 5. The 4 is going to follow on. And then because we are in ones and tens, we've got actual whole numbers. We've got 5,400. We know the 4 in the 100 is in this column here. We have 400s, which means there are no tens and there are no ones. So they are placeholding zeros to create the 400 value. Okay, so again, 5,400. SATs question, blue box. We need to make sure that 5,400 is written in there to get the mark. Okay, so again, don't be put off if it's a decimal or not a decimal. The key thing is just get the number written down on the squared paper, and we'll have a look at doing that in some of these SATs examples. So one final multiplication, looking at multiplying by 1,000. So we've got 0.19 times 1,000. Key thing to spot, or just to notice, just to help you out, is that multiplying by 1,000, there's 3 zeros in 1,000. So that's going to help us, just remind us that we're going to move 3 columns. Everything's going to become 3 times bigger. It's going to become 1,000 times bigger. Times by 1,000 is times by 10, times by 10, times by 10. So again, first thing we're going to do is just get the number written down. 0.19. Fantastic. There is a decimal in the question, so we're going to ensure there's a decimal in our answer spaces just to help us get organized. And we're going to move everything 1 space to 3 spaces to the left. So if we just go from this column, so we've got 1, because remember the decimal column isn't a column of any value. So there's 1, that's times 10, times 10, times 10. So we've made 3 column jumps of times 10, which is basically multiplying by 1,000. So that 1 is going to end up here. The 9 has to come next. And then essentially, if we think about our place value, we've got the ones column, the tens column, and the hundreds column. So we know that essentially we've got 190 because we've got 100, we've got 9 tens, 100, 9 tens. So obviously we need a placeholder 0 that's going to go in there. I'm just going to put that in red. So our answer is 190. It's not 190.0. Okay, it's just 190. Again, make sure that we transfer that into an answer box. So 190, and we would move on with a nice mark. So again, let's get straight into this. SATs questions. Again, if we're in the SATs, we're working quickly. I'm spotting, I'm just going to get rid of that. I'm spotting that I've got times 1,000, so I'm going to move everything 3 spaces to the left. I'm going to write the number down. So we've got 13.05. Decimal in the question, decimal in the answer, and I'm going to move everything 3 spaces. So that 1 is here, so it's going to be 1, 2, 3. So the 1 is going to end up here. 3, 0, 5, placeholder 0. So all of a sudden, I've got my answer, which is 13,050. Okay, which is 13,050. Very simple, multiplying by 1,000. And again, this is a question where potentially we could go wrong. Okay, if it's point blank, then we can forget about the decimal. We just have a whole number. All right, we did have a thousandth, sorry, a hundredth. We had 500ths here, but now we've multiplied that. That 500th has actually become 5/10 because it's become 1,000 times bigger. It's moved 3 columns to the left. It's now 50. All right. So again, making sure finally we transfer that answer into the answer box to make sure that we get the mark. Again, 25.34 times 10. Again, spotting that it's 10, 100 or 1,000, that we're just using our place value strategy to move the values of the digits left or right, times in or dividing by 10, 100 or 1,000. So again, good habit to get into is just write the number down, 25.34. There's a decimal in the question, so there's a decimal in the answer. Now we've created place value, we're multiplying by 10. The little clue is there's 1 0, so everything's going to move 1 column to the left as we increase that. So I'm going to start with the 2. So the 2 is going to move 1 column to the left, and then everything else is just going to follow in after it. 5, 3, 4. Perfect. So again, we're going to transfer that into the answer box. Job done. So 25.34 times 10 is 253.4. And we would get the mark. So next question. These questions are, presented like this to try and not to confuse you, but just to really see that you've got genuine understanding. And this is a question quite easily where we could go wrong because we've got 1,010 times 10. In essence, where do all the ones and zeros go? But again, we can avoid that confusion by just writing the question down. Now we know, we don't need to write this down, but we know that that's now the ones column, that's the tens, that's the hundreds, that's the thousands. And everything is going to move this way because we're multiplying by 10. The little clue is 1 0, so we're going to move everything 1 space to the left. Very, very simple. So I'm going to start in this thousandths column here, and we're going to move 1 column to the left. So again, 1 0 1 0 0, because essentially that last one, we have moved everything 1 place left, which means it's 10 times bigger. So essentially this number up here is tens of thousands. So we have 10,000, then we know we've got 100, okay, nothing in here. So 100 would need another 0, so we need a placeholder 0 to fill in that whole number. So again, we've got 10,100. And again, making sure that we come back to this, that the answer is placed in there. And multiplying by 10, 100 and 1,000 is just that simple. Again, here's another previous SATs question where they're using ones and zeros to maybe try and confuse us a little bit. We're multiplying by 1,000. So again, the key little thing to spot is that we're going to move 101 3 columns to the left. So let's just get in and do it. See how quick it is. 101. We're going to move everything 3 columns to the left. So just to show you, that's 1, 2, 3. So we're now working in this column. So we've got 1, 0, 1. And then obviously we're going to have 0, 0, 0. So our answer is 1, 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, which is 101,000. Very simple. Now, again, if we just went back to doing that, if we weren't really sure, so we're using the strategy that I'm giving you is 1, 0, 1. Let's see how quick this is. 1, 2, 3. 1, 0, 1, 0, 0, 0. 1, 0, 1, 0, 0, 0. Now that took probably 10 seconds. So it's definitely worth, if you're not sure, using this strategy. And again, this is just place value, ones, tens, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, and so on. Okay, multiplying to the left. We know that we've got 3 zeros, so that's going to help us move things 1, 2, 3 columns to the left. And one final SATs question. Again, let's just dive into it. Pause it if you want to have a go. But essentially, I would just be writing 2, 6, 7, 1. Very simple. I'm timesing by 1,000. my little clue there. So I'm going to move everything's 3 columns to the left. Just going to start with the number 2 here in the thousands column. So I've got 1, 2, 3. You don't need to write this on. I'm just doing it to show you. So the 2 is going to end up in this column. Then everything just follows on. 6, 7, 1. And obviously 0, 0, 0. So we've got quite a large number. 2, 6, 7, 1, 0, 0, 0. Okay, so we've got basically 2,671,000. What I would say here, I've seen this a lot, it's just popped into my head and I had to concentrate there, is that once we've got this answer here and we're transferring it into the answer box, you must concentrate to make sure that this exact number is transferred into here. So if you get the 6 and the 7 written down the wrong way around, the markers aren't going to come back here and go, well, they got it right, they get the mark. It doesn't work like that. The markers won't even look at this. All they do is look at this. They're on a computer and they'll click it and it'll move on and give you the mark to the next question. So they're not looking for any sort of demonstration of knowledge. This space here is just for you. The markers will not even look at it. Okay, all they will see is this, if it's right or wrong, and they'll click on a computer screen, correct or incorrect. All right, so it's really important. You've done all the hard work, you've used all this knowledge. Make sure that you write the correct numbers in the correct order to answer these questions correctly. Once again, this week I've provided a lot of questions for you to have a go at. So again, these questions here are times 10, these are times by 100, and these are times by 1,000. There is a mix in there, so you've got some whole numbers, you've also got some decimals, you've got some decimals with no whole number, so you've got 0 point something or 0.056. So there's lots of combinations to work with, and I wouldn't expect you to encounter anything other than these types of questions in the SATs. So if you're going through these questions and you're getting them all pretty much right, then you're going to get these marks in the SATs. So let's have a look at decimals now. So sorry, not decimals, division. So we've got our division symbol. The same principles ring true. So again, whether it's tens, hundreds, or thousands, we don't really need to consider too much the impact of, when we see the 0, it's exactly the same in that we need to be thinking move in one column. The only difference is now with division is that we are going to move to the right. So the numbers will become smaller. So because they're becoming smaller, they would move to the right in place value. And that makes sense because if we had, let's say, hundreds, tens, ones, let's just include some thousands as well. If you had a number in here, like, let's just say, 20 or 200, yeah. If 200 is going to become smaller, the only way it can become smaller is obviously for the hundreds column to become less. But if we're dividing by 10, 100 and 1,000, if we divide that by 10, then it would just move in. The 2 would move one column to the right, and then we would just end up with 20. All right. So everything's going to move to the right now with division. So let's have a go at this one. Now, my top tip a little bit with division, because things are going to get smaller, naturally, we're going to end up in decimal territory. So I would advise that when we write these out, obviously 70, I would put a decimal in, knowing that it's there. And if we end up with nothing in here, then in these areas, then we can completely forget about it and know that we've got a whole number. But the majority of these answers are going to end up in decimal territory to a certain extent. So by just putting the decimals in and creating place value, we've got ones and tens, and we've got our tenths and hundreds. We can just go from there. So again, dividing by 10 means everything's going to move to the right one column. Me personally, I don't really want to move zeros around to start with. So I'm just going to move this 7. So that would end up in this column here. And essentially, the 0 would move into this column. All right, so we end up with 7.0. But 7.0 is just 7. Okay, there's nothing here. That placeholder 0 was used here because we had a 7 in the tens column.
So we need a 0 to create 70. Now we've just got 7. The decimal, everything in here is showing amounts that are smaller than 1. Okay, so we might have 0.5, which is a half, or all the different decimal increments. But if we have nothing, then essentially the answer is whatever is on this side. Okay, so here 70 divided by 10 is 7. Okay, so again, if we had the blue answer box, we would just make sure that we wrote 7 and you would get the mark. Okay, so again, just before I move away from this one, because we'll roll through these next few ones quite quickly, we're looking for tens, hundreds and thousands and spotting the zeros, which is a clue to tell us how many columns we're going to move. And again, we're probably going to need to utilize the decimal column just to help us organize this and just move through it quickly. We want to move at speed. So by doing this, we can lay it out really quickly, get the mark and move on. Okay, but it might be that you just know, because all this question's asking is how many tens are in 70. Okay, to simplify it. So the answer is 10. So 70 divided by 10, quite often, you don't even need to drop into this. You should just know that 70 divided by 10 is 7. But quite often in SATs, that can be tricky and we get a bit stuck. So always know that this is here. So again, this question I've spotted already that we've got 10 divided by 10. So I'm going to move everything one column to the right, getting smaller. So again, get into the habit of writing, just rub this out, of writing the number down straight away on your squared paper. So we've got 9.6, the decimal in the question, so I'm going to use a decimal in the answer, and everything's going to move this way, one column. So you could move the 9 first, or the 6 is completely up to you. I'm going to move the 6, so the 6 is going to move one column to the right. So it's going to end up in this column, and then the 9 is obviously the next number. So because we have 0.96, we need a placeholder 0, and that basically shows that in this land of everything that's this way, of whole numbers, ones, tens, hundreds, thousands, everything, there's just nothing. There's 0. But we have something that's less than 1, which is 0.96. So we have 0.96. So again, that would need transferring into an answer box. I know these are a bit messy. We've got 0.96, and that would get us the mark. And what I always used to say to a lot of my pupils is the more of these that you do, the more you do questions dividing by 10, times by 10, whatever it is, you'll just start to see it, and this strategy won't be needed. So all of a sudden you'll see 29.5 times 100, and you'll just see that 29.5 becomes 295, and then it becomes 2,950. You'll just be able to see the numbers moving in your head. All right. So again, good habits. Let's just write the number down, 26.9. There's a decimal in the question, so I'm going to include a decimal in the answer. We're getting smaller because we're dividing, and I can see that we're dividing by 100. Whoops. So my clue is 2 columns to the right we're going to move. All right. So let's have a quick look at this. So I'm going to work with the 9, and I know that 2 columns basically means we're working in this column. So the 9 is going to go here. The 6 is just the next number, and the 2 is the next number. So 26.9 divided by 100 is 0.269, and we have no whole numbers. So it's 0.269. And if we had a blue box, that would need to be written in it, and that would get us the mark. And again, thinking back to that mental strategy that I just talked about, 26.9, we know that dividing by 100 is just dividing by 10 and dividing by 10. So doing enough of these, you'll just see that 26.9 divided by 10 becomes 2.69, and then 2.69 divided by 10 becomes 0.269. The numbers are staying in the same order. Okay, they're just moving the place value column that they sit within because they've been divided or times by 10. Again, another example with a whole number. So we've got 127. Again, I can see that we're going to need decimals, but because we're dividing, I would just get into the habit of creating a decimal column. Okay, so that if we do actually move into decimals, which we may or may not, we don't end up with a false number and a false answer. We've created good place value. So again, I'm dividing by 1,000. Hopefully you've spotted that already. I'm dividing by 1,000, which means, I prefer green, there's 3 zeros, which means we're going to move 3 columns to the right because we're getting smaller. So again, I'm going to start with the 1 in this one because I want to make sure I get 1 in exactly the right place. So 3 columns, that's 1, 2, 3. So I know the 1 is going, I'm going to write the 1 here. All right. So I can do that now, 1. And then I know the next number has to be 2 and the next number has to be 7 because we're keeping that order. So my answer is 0.127 and I'm showing a 0 here because I've got no whole numbers. So it's 0.127. And again, if there was a blue box in the corner, we would need to transfer that answer in to make sure that we got the mark. So 127 divided by 1,000 is 0.127. And again, I'm just going to do this one in speed mode. If you want to pause it, fine. I'm just going to go through and do it so we can see how quite a complicated looking question, 304.7 divided by 1,000, can be answered quite quickly. So I've got 304.7, it's a question and answer. I'm going to move everything 3 columns to the right because I can see I'm dividing by 1,000. So that's 1, 2, 3. So the 3 is going to end up there. Then it has to be 0. Then it has to be 4. Then it has to be 7. And I've got nothing now in the what. I've got no whole numbers. So there's my answer, 0.3047. Might seem complicated, but again, I've answered that very, very quickly in 15 seconds. Tick. Right, so let's just quickly dive into some SATs questions. Each one, you might want to just pause it and I'll just go ahead and do it. So again, good habits, write it on the paper, 2.12. Now again, the key thing here that I would just note is in the SATs questions, I've just done it there. I've just gone into autopilot because we're doing division questions. But what you must spot in these is obviously the operation. So it's division. So I'm moving to the right, the numbers are getting smaller. So now they're SATs questions, you really must think about what you're doing. So I'm going to move everything 1 column to the right. So that 2 is going to come in here. And I've got nothing there. Fantastic. 0.212. And that would have got us the mark. But again, just making sure that we're doing everything that we should. We're dividing. So we're moving to the right. It's divided by 10. So that's going to be 1 column to the right. So it's getting 10 times smaller. Making sure that we get all these things right will help us get that mark. Again, let's just get straight into it. 0.3 divided by 10. So 0.3. There's 1 in the question, so there's 1 in the answer. I'm going to move everything to the right because we're dividing. And there's 110. Sorry, there's 10. So that's my little clue. Okay, so everything's going to move to the right. So the only number I'm going to work with is the 3. So that's 1 column to the right. We need a placeholder and 0, placeholder and 0. So my answer is 0.03. That would get us the mark. Again, you might just be able to see the answer, but let's just, for the sake of it, this can be completed in 10 seconds. So we're dividing by 100, which means 2 columns to the right. So here we go. 0.1 question in. There's 1 in the question, 1 in the answer. So 2 columns, that's 1, 2, so that's going to go there. So 0, 0, 0. So that's our answer, 0.001. I'm just going to rub that out, actually. I'm just going to rub that out. Muddled my decimal up a little bit, and you should do this in the SATs as well to make it very, very clear what your answer is, 0.001. Again, if we have a look, this is question 20 in the SATs paper. So really straightforward and easy marks that we should be picking up around question 20. Again, 0.9. It's a decimal in the question, so I'm going to put 1 in the answer. Start with divided by 100, so we're moving to the right. And again, There's 2 zeros, so we're going to move 2 columns. Yeah, so that would have been 1, 2. Everything else gets backfilled as placeholder zeros. So that's 0.009. And that's an actual SATs question. Dead simple, 1 mark, move on. And again, final SATs question that we're going to cover, again, division, but again, 15.5 divided by 100. Question 22, so it's beyond halfway through the SATs paper. Key things we're spotting is the division symbol, and obviously dividing by 100, which is telling us 2 columns to the right. So again, we're just going to get straight into writing the numbers on the squared paper. There's decimal in the question, so I'm going to include one in the answer for now. Divided by 100, so this 0.5 I'm going to put here. That means the next 5 follows on, and we have the 10 moving into the 10th. So again, if we were just showing that, look, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. But if we get the first, if we move this one first, then everything else just follows in behind. Likewise, if we were going this way, I'd move this one first, and then everything else follows in behind. So we've got that logical order. Again, making sure that we have no whole numbers. So it's 0.155. And again, for me, even though that's quite far into a SATs paper, question 22, it's an easy mark. It's an easy mark if we know what we're doing. So again, I always used to say to lots of pupils, if you know it mentally, great. You know, because divide by 10, we're getting to 1.55, and then we're ending up 0.155. But for me, it's just as quick sometimes to guarantee ourselves, if we get really good at this, then we can just get the mark really simply. And that's why practicing is really, really important, because if you start to do these and you use the strategy that I've shown you, all of a sudden, as I said before, you'll just start to see the pattern that when you have a team number and you divide it by 10, it becomes a 1 number. It's just place value. When you have a hundreds number like here, and you divide it by 100, 100 is going to become a 10, then a 1. So we know it's going to be a 1 type number when we move it along. So it's going to be 1.0567. So we can quite easily see the patterns emerging. Okay, but the more of these that you do, the more easy and the more confident you will be, the more easy it will be. So again, these are questions divided by 10. They become more difficult as you go down. These are divided by 100, more difficult as you go down. These are divided by 1,000. Not necessarily more difficult, but they're all quite challenging. Okay. What I would suggest you maybe do is do these ones. Just thought about this. Is that you maybe do these ones as sets. So do this one first, then this one, then this one, and then move into these and jumble them up. So maybe do this one first, then maybe do this one, then maybe do this one, then 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 this one. And what that'll do is that just prompts you to think, because you'll just go into autopilot, okay? And what this will do is get you out of autopilot and all of a sudden think, oh, I need to divide by 100. Oh, I need to divide by 1,000. Oh, I need to divide by 10, whatever it is. So maybe pause it now, and that'll give you a much more varied experience. I'll maybe look at doing something like this for next week's sets of questions. But I hope that helps. Multiplying and dividing by 10, 100, and 1,000 will head back over to me in my office.
Well, there we go. That's week 3 done and dusted. Now, hopefully from that video and the instruction and the opportunities and the practice questions that we've just had, you can really see how multiplying and dividing by 10, 100 and 1,000 is really, really simple. And then the biggest problem, as we discussed right back at the start, is getting in your own way and thinking that you have to do a short division or a short multiplication, when in fact, it's just understanding what timesing by 10 or multiplying by 10, 100 and thousands mean, and what dividing by 10, hundreds and thousands means. And just like lesson 1 and lesson 2, it all comes back to place value, understanding our ones, tens, hundreds, thousands, and how numbers become 10 times bigger or 10 times smaller. So again, these are really easy marks to pick up. I'd love to hear what you thought about the lesson. Please make sure that you comment and let me know which school. I'd love to see more school names in some of the comments so I can shout those out in future videos. Please make sure that you subscribe to the channel. Keep leaving those comments, which is really appreciated. And we're on that journey now, 16 weeks to SATs. Thank you for getting involved in this video, and I'll see you all in the next lesson.